All right. 1 second. You mean screen sharing?
Yep, you just did,
Okay.
Noreen.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. B, you may begin whenever you'd like.
Okay, thank you, Jesus. Welcome to the March 3rd, 2020. Interesting. One is this says it's really two meeting of CB6 Bylaws Committee. My name is B. Disman. I am chair of the committee. This meeting is called to order at 6:34. Tonight, we are joined by District Manager Jesus Perez. I need members of the public. You can raise any questions or comments that you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. If there's time following the committee's discussion, we'll field questions from the public. Now, we still need a minute taker for tonight's meeting. If you're able to take the minutes of tonight's meeting, please raise your hand. I ask Jesus to tell me who raises their hand. Do you see any hands, Jesus? Sandra volunteered last time.
I wish I saw any hands, but I do not.
Adam, can I impose?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. And I think the bigger things we want is the recommendations we'll park so that we can talk about. Thank you so much for doing that, Adam.
No problem.
You all should have received an email from the board office with a link to Doodle sign-up sheet for minutes takers at your committee meeting, at the committee meetings for 22. For your convenience, the link will be put up in chat right now. I did want to welcome to the committee Mark Thompson. I don't know, Jesus, if he's joined us yet.
Not yet, not that I see.
Okay. So Jesus, would you take attendance, please, by roll call?
Sure. All right, folks. Excuse me. I will call your name. Please indicate that you are present for the record. B. Disman.
Present.
Thank you. Adam Hartkey. Adam Hartkey.
It looks like he just left the call entirely.
Okay. Hopefully, I'm sure he'll come right back.
There he is.
Hi guys, I'm back. Sorry, I tried to unmute and got a phone call at the same time, so just my phone exploded. So, but I'm here.
So, Adam Hartkey is here. Thank you. Because he's our quorum. Seema Shah will not.
And minutes taker.
Yes.
And minutes taker.
Yes, Seema Shah will not be joining us tonight. Sean Sherman. I don't see or hear him, so no for right now. Sandro Sherrod.
Present.
Thank you. Maura Wong.
Present.
Thank you. Mark Thompson.
I know he was, someone just joined, and that is Mark.
Mark is joining.
Good timing, Mark. Thank you.
All right, speak of the devil, Mark Thompson.
The devil was involved in my last phone call. We'll leave it at that.
Okay. Hopefully the devil is wearing Prada.
No, the devil, anyway, I'm not going to go there. But you'll know all about it on Tuesday, apparently.
Okay. That concludes the roll call. With 5 out of 7 members present, we do have quorum.
Thank you. Okay. By the way, Mark, you missed my welcoming you to the committee. So I will go on record again to welcome you. Okay, so the agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and appears on the screen before you. However, due to Seema inability to be here, I am amending the agenda to remove bylaws section 1 and 9. When you also look at the section of 2, 3, and 4 that we have on the agenda, it is most of the comments that we've received focus around those. So I think that will be a long discussion. So I'm going to ask if there is any objection to the amended agenda as we see in front of you. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the amended agenda, will you raise your hand through Zoom?
I don't see any hands.
Okay, then if there's no objections, the amended agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. In order to conduct an efficient meeting, let's observe a few ground rules. No one may speak until granted the floor. Committee members, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. The chat function should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us to any technical difficulties you are having or to state in writing information like an email address that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. When a committee member is given the floor to speak, I will identify you and you can unmute yourself so that you can speak. We are required by New York State law to have a transcript of the meeting, so please keep your questions and comments succinct and germane to the discussion. The order of the adopted agenda will be followed. So the first item on the agenda, if we could have it in front of us, is the summary of the CB6 members' recommendations for bylaws. And when I went on the Airtable at the date that it was closed, there were six board members that provided comments. And if you look at them, they could apply to the various sections. I see a hand up.
Yeah, sorry, B. Jesus just sent an email before the meeting started of the bylaws that said that it was a submit. Is that a clean draft of the bylaws, or is that somebody's edits that we should be looking at as well?
That is someone's edits. That is, as I was just going to comment. The deadline was extended, for the bylaws submission until this past Monday, and Ronnie White's just submitted that. I skimmed it right before the meeting, and she provided, not by sections, but she provided in different type her additions to the bylaws. So you have to skim it through to see what her additions are. So I started to do that before our meeting. Thanks, Anna. Okay. Now, in the 6 people that commented besides Ronnie, a lot of the comments that were made were very similar to the comments that we were shared from the executive committee. And it seemed that most of the comments focused around the top 3 items that were actually on the agenda for tonight, which is 2, 3, and 4. So I asked Sandro if he would take the lead, although each one of us are involved and should have read those sections. We have a copy of the bylaws that we could put up for the sections if anyone wants it. I have some ideas. I hope all of you have some ideas, but Sandra, I'm going to give you the floor first to deal with Article 2, and we could pick it up from there for discussion.
Okay, thank you, B. So as these comments that are on the screen right now, some of these came in fairly late. I started with the comments that were first circulated from the executive committee in terms of areas where we wanted to perhaps look to see if there was more clarification required or if it was no longer appropriate as written in the bylaws. So perhaps I could share the document that I have that I started annotating because that might help us kind of get through all of the different comments that go back and forth. And so I think what I'll do is I'll just kind of scan through the document in the documents order as opposed to the comment order. But right. I think we'll address all of them by the time we get to the end.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jesus. Okay, so this is a Google Doc of the current bylaws where there's some sort of modification made by me. You'll see it here in green. Hopefully it's large enough for everyone to be able to read it. not, I could try to make it a little larger.
Could you make it a little, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, now I can see. Thank you.
Let's see if I can, I want to make sure the comments are there. Okay. Hopefully that's better. So for example, one of the comments from the executive committee was that there was words stuck together. I would agree with that. So throughout the whole document, it looks like there was probably like a find and replace error. The board became the board as in one word without a space. And that happened repeatedly throughout the document. So I cleaned it up in the version that I have in front of me just to make that a little bit more readable. That was one of the direct comments that we saw. So in this example here, all information was without a space. So now I added a space there. Just continuing on, again, it happened again with such matters. This seems to have happened a lot at the end of paragraphs, in fact. So I was wondering if there was some sort of strange reason why that happened. One thing that I think did come up here in this particular section here, and so we're, for anyone who's following along who can't read it, let me just scroll back up. We're still on section 2, board officers. So under section 2C, 1F, under the duties of the chair, the last sentence read, the chair may appoint a board member as parliamentarian to advise on such matters, with the missing space. So one of the comments that came in, well, actually several comments that came in, I want to say, had a little bit to do with the general structure of business meetings. So there were some comments around who can appoint or who should elect, different roles. One of them was parliamentarian. And so I did refer to my copy of Robert's Rules of Order to make sure that I was recalling things correctly. And so I wanted to kind of comment a couple of things. So first, I think what often happens in our board meetings is when a chair issues a ruling, someone who does not agree with that ruling or just does not understand why the chair arrived at that decision will often try to seek some sort of parliamentary third opinion, second opinion, which is not really the way a parliamentarian is supposed to work. So traditionally, a parliamentarian is supposed to act as an advisor to the chair of the body. So the chair of a committee, the chair of the board, whoever is chairing that assembly at any given time. So first, I wanted to make it clear that a parliamentarian, if one were to be appointed, oh, it looks like I just went to dark mode. You saw a little flash, and I guess it's the time to switch to my evening mode. So everything got a little darker. But a parliamentarian really is there to advise on what is in order, what's not in order for the person who's chairing the meeting. So I did add, as a potential way to address one of the concerns, the words "the chair." So the chair may appoint a board member as parliamentarian to advise the chair, to be clear who the parliamentarian would advise on such matters. So that is one change that I made to really clarify what a parliamentarian might do. Now, there's a couple of things, and I just want to take a little sidebar for a second and say this is one of the things that there was also some, what are the qualifications for a parliamentarian? And there were some just general questions about normal operational things, which aren't really probably best served in a bylaws document, which really acts as the constitution or the framework which we all need to follow. There's obviously regular HR procedural matters, administrative matters that we wouldn't want to go into that level of minutia in this document. And there's definitely some legitimate questions about how board business in the state of New York or the city of New York or community boards operate. And again, those might be something that we want to think about as part of an additional training or lecture. B, you're the chair. You don't have to raise your hand. Just interrupt me anytime.
Well, I didn't. I didn't want to interrupt because you're hitting on one of the things, Sandra, that I looked at also very closely in the comments and in reading the bylaws part of it. And I think where we run into, I agree with you that the chair, the advisor is to the chair or to the chair of a committee, if you're doing a meeting. But I think where we get into this is the fact that the chair may appoint a board member as parliamentarian to advise. Since this has come up so many times, I want to throw it out to the committee as to whether we want to take a position that not the may, that it should be appointed, that we should have a parliamentarian. Because otherwise at every session, we wind up going into this debate about parliamentarians. So that's the only thing I wanted to throw out. Sandra, you've been at many, Mark's been at many of the meetings.
Yeah.
You know, we've gone through it all. And so should we have a parliamentarian? And not, the board chair would still select it, but should we have one, as a question for me?
Mark has his hand up, so I'll defer my comment until Mark goes.
Yeah, I just think, Maura hasn't been here for decades and years, but it's a continuing problem. And I think it just makes sense for at least us to at least suggest or, put this forward somehow, that we do have a parliamentarian, make it official, make sure the person is trained properly, that everyone on the board, especially some people, understand the role of the parliamentarian and what they can and can't do. Just do a real kind of training of the board and get it straightened out, instead of having it be something like, well, I'm going to call mom.
Yeah.
It's just, how many hours have we spent in our lives now dealing with this issue? And I think, I put a little circle around it on my notes and was like, but I think that even if it's not in the bylaws, something should be done about it, so it's official.
Right.
But I'm not going to bring up the historian. I'll leave that alone.
No, please leave historian alone. But I think that's why I wanted to make the language as a recommendation stronger, that we should, not may. Being a bureaucrat, there's a big difference between may and should.
Right. So I think to Mark's point, though, and I don't disagree, but my concern would be that one, we might not have anyone that is qualified at any given time. So right now, I think we probably do have a few people who would be good as a parliamentarian, or maybe who think they are, and maybe not. But I think having someone who's trained is kind of crucial, and someone who understands ranking motions and what's in order and what's not. And what used to happen, like when I was chair, is I think we had someone who often would sit at the front table. I know we're kind of virtually meeting right now, but actually be able to advise. So if the chair of any particular assembly, again, has a specific question, they would ask the person, not the body, and not, have an open discussion about what is appropriate or not, because again, it's really the ruling of the chair that matters. And Mark, I think your hand is still up, but I see also now Maura as an Adam. So
yeah, I'll go last.
Oh, okay, again. Okay, yeah. Maura.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that I do agree that we should consider changing the language to should. My question was going to be, how do we guarantee that this person will be qualified? Right. And in addition to that, what would the term limits be for this role? And does that need to be something that we address here as well?
Right. So I'm going to make a note. Adam, feel free to chime in if you want me to modify anything else. We don't have to solve every little language item right now. I just want to get through them all. And of course, I'll make a note and see if we can come up with a recommended thing for the body. Adam?
Yeah, I just really want to echo the training and the qualifications, because I don't know, and I'm trying to envision like a worst case scenario of potentially somebody who becomes like a sort of like a veto of some sort, like
Adam, you're dropping out a lot. I don't know
unless that's sort of
I think you said veto, and then we didn't really hear what you said after that.
Veto Facella? What?
There you go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Sorry. Yeah. So I think as long as we detail not very specifically, but like just what the qualifications are, establish exactly what this is, and not just a person that a chair picks, and then that this person can, be a veto power in the meeting or something along those lines.
Right. Because that is not what a parliamentarian is, right? So, right. They definitely do not have the power to veto the chair. That there is a possibility to veto the chair by taking a vote of the body, and that's how it should be done.
or like the vetoing of the process, or like
Yeah.
torpedoing something, interjecting themselves in a way that a parliamentary is not supposed to do, let alone just a regular meeting.
Right. Mark?
Yeah, just my thought was that in my travels around the world at every community board in the city, a lot of them don't have parliamentarians. We seem to have the issue for one reason. Others have similar problems, but they keep under control. But maybe the borough president could actually do something like, let's have a parliamentarian training where people come and, there's one from each board, maybe 3. So, people can take over after 1 year or 2 year, like whatever Mara, whatever you said, like maybe it's a 1-year term, maybe it's 2 or 3, who knows? But, train people, and that should really be up to the borough president, do a course on it, and have someone who's an actual parliamentarian that belongs to that organization come in.
The National Association of Parliamentarians?
Yeah. So there is one. So I want to comment on that, Mark, because there are courses given by the borough president on Robert's rules. Yeah, because I was actually looking at that when I was looking at the courses that were given. So I think when you're talking about someone you select as parliamentarian should really have training, and not what they consider are Robert's rules, because everyone has a figment or an imaginary rule that they try to use at meetings. Okay,
right.
But the borough president has, and I think Jesus, can you verify that? Because I think I've seen that on the list of courses. Am I correct?
Yes, they do have one. I have taken a few of them because knowing that this is an issue, it has been an issue for some time. I thought that the best way to proceed might be for the office to put together some sort of basic parliamentary procedure manual for the entire board to have, so that everybody shares in this knowledge. Because as Sandro mentioned, the staff, we see a lot of things, and what we see is it does seem like sometimes there will be people who will speak out about parliamentary matters, and whether they actually are in the right or not is debatable. And so the training, I hear that word training, that is where the rub will be. And having attended some of these borough president trainings, I have to admit they're a bit off the shelf. They are led by a member of the Metropolitan Parliamentarians of New York or whatever. There's an organization. They're led that way. Many times, these folks don't know anything about community boards. They, one time, the person giving the training had not even looked at the PowerPoint they were giving, and they were just doing it. And maybe they are well versed in parliamentary procedure for like corporate boards, but a community board is a slightly different, quite a different animal. And so that's where I think we can say, again, it is up to this committee to decide what language ultimately goes to the bylaws, but we can say should all we want. Whether the training and the scaffolding needed to support that will be there is a really big if. I'm like 50% of the way through a little document, because I have the latest version of Robert's Rules, 12th edition. It is over 700 pages long.
Yes.
So our options are, we can buy 50 copies of this book and give it to all the members to, verse themselves in. But given that sometimes it's hard enough just to read a draft resolution, it's optimistic to think that everybody will come learn it in this book. There are online just random parliamentary procedure grid sheets and things like that, but I've never found them super helpful. So what I've been doing for a few years now, actually, is whenever bizarre parliamentary moments happen in meetings, like happened at last full board's meeting, I note it down and I'm like, okay, how do you properly do this? And how do you properly do that? I've tried to ask some of those questions at the borough president trainings, and sometimes you get an answer, but because they are not designed, they're not tailored to community boards.
Right.
Oftentimes, we have to take Robert's Rules, and that's I started going through Robert's Rules and finding, how do we adapt Robert's Rules, or how do we take Robert's Rules and the things that we normally do and try and find basis in Robert's Rules. So that's my
I think that's an excellent point. I mean, so maybe I can reach out to the board to the borough president's office as well. But perhaps there could be more of a standardized community board specific primer on Robert's rules that is not 700 pages long that could be circulated across the board, so it's not one-sided.
Yeah, I think, Sandra, that should be the recommendation, because I went to look for Robert's Rules for Dummies, and you don't really have that. So I think we all at least agreed to, and we'll figure out language and stuff. We need to deal with the parliamentarian, whether it be may or should, or what the language will be, and there needs to be some training that goes with that.
Okay. I'm going to move on, Adam. I see your hand still up. Maura, is it okay if I move on, or did you have any other items you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, my hand should be down now.
Okay.
This is just a quick question,
Sure.
which displays my naivete. But does the parliamentarian need to be a member of the board, or could it be someone like Jesus in the board office?
So actually, as Jesus mentioned, there's actually several formal associations of parliamentarians, and normally they're not a member of the board or member of the body, I should say. Normally they're a consultant or a staff member who is well-versed. So theoretically, yes, it could be a staff member who is certified as a parliamentarian through the state or the city or the national level, and is recognized as such.
And just B, as an FYI, there is a book called Robert's Rules of Order in Brief. I have that one too. It's a companion guide to the 700-page book, but even that in brief is over 200 pages long.
Yeah, and then
put
I
out by
was
Cliff
looking
Notes?
for one. I was looking really for one for dummies, but that's okay.
But using them together has been helpful to me. So there's a lot on our plate at the office, but give us a little bit of time. We are determined to issue this, and then it could be a living document. The board members can sort of contribute to it and stuff like that. But yes, clearly everyone needs to have this knowledge. Not, if ultimately a parliamentarian is appointed, fine, but everyone needs to have access to this knowledge.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, like whether we're putting together a quick summary of parliamentary procedures, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, ranking motions, anything like that, that could definitely be as part of like a procedural handbook for board members that lives outside of the bylaws framework, but is something that we can all follow and reference. Hello, Sean. So I'm just going to continue on, since I think it's already half an hour past and we just have done one item. So
that's why I said to you, Sandra, these are the meaty items. Go ahead.
Yeah. So again, appointments now has an additional space. Same with such committee in that paragraph. So one comment that came about from I think it was Brian, who had served as treasurer for some time. We don't have an impressed account, but I can imagine that there is a need to have a signatory, for the board on some accounts. I don't think we have one currently that requires it, but I actually just made a recommendation of making it a little bit less specific to an impressed, but any financial accounts or any banking accounts. Just it's a working language, but. Any thoughts?
Yeah, Sandra, since I was involved with Jesus on the impress, the board might decide at some point that it wants it, so I wouldn't remove it. But I think is it the fact of, and I have to go back and look. I thought there were two signatures, the chair and one other on the impress. I just don't remember.
Yeah, I don't recall ever signing anything. So.
I remember the one, but I wouldn't stake my life on there not being two. I'd have to look back, but we closed it back in 2018, so it's been several years since I thought of it. But Sandra's compromise to serve as a signatory on any board financial accounts seems like a...
that's a good compromise.
Or even say as required or as necessary.
Yeah.
Or appropriate. Something like that.
I'm just going to put needed for the time being. Some reason that's sticking in my head, but
that's easy.
I can change it. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible so people have less questions.
Parliamentarian. Oh, sorry.
So, Sandra, if you're going to go on to the next section of duties of the first vice president, can I go back to the chair?
Absolutely.
Because there were two things here, and it actually is tied to what you're going to go to next. And I didn't look ahead at your, no way to look ahead. You know, I've always had a concern when you look at the first vice chair and the second, and certainly you guys have been there, that we exclude them from being appointed to a standing committee, or we exclude them from having advice to a number of committees. When you actually go to those duties, and I think you'll go to them in a minute, I think the positions could be media, okay? And I don't actually know why I don't know what the history is about excluding them about being a chair of a standing committee. It may be that that's the best person at the time to be a chair. So is there any background that you or Mark may know about that I'm not familiar with?
Are we being recorded? Yes, we
Yes.
are.
Yeah, we're being recorded.
We don't have to speak in
Just say to me
specifics,
this
Mark.
background. Just say this
I'm going to tell you all in Estonian, okay? Nude.
So I think without going, into very specific personnel matters over the years, I mean, I think there's always been a challenge with balancing having a very large executive committee that is capable. At one point we had 5 vice chairs. I don't know why. Obviously this is a volunteer organization, and at times some people are unavailable to do their primary role, whether it's treasurer or chair or whatever. So I think it does make sense to have a backup person. But you're right, B. The vice chairs specifically over the years have served basically to fill gaps, right? So if there's a specific need, and I did add a little bit of language to that, I didn't go in grave detail, but normally in the past, when the chair is unable to attend an EGAP meeting or a community engagement session or something on behalf of the board, they might send one of the vice chairs to represent the board because they are another elected leader of the board. But in other cases, to your point, we've had very specific tasks. Like we've always, in the past 10 or so years, we've often had a vice chair that is acted as a mentor, for example, to new members, right? That hasn't been a formal role, just something that they were tasked with repeatedly. It might make some sense to add some of those formal tasks, but of course, I think there is a good amount of importance with allowing a new board chair some latitude to start new initiatives, to advance things that they might think is important. So I think there is a little bit of a give and take there. I don't want to be so proscriptive in tasks that a chair is hampered from being effective.
So that's where I was going. This actually prohibits the person from doing it.
Yes, yes, right. So right now.
Yeah, the way it is now. I was looking to change language to not appoint, may appoint. For example, we may want at some point a personnel committee, okay? And, one of the vice chairs is the best person with the experience and background. So I was trying to open it up a little, not being so prescriptive that you couldn't do it, and use the expertise that we have.
Yeah, I mean, the one other comment I'll make, and then I'll, of course, defer to everyone, is I think not that a problem that we've had recently, but I know when I first joined the board, I've heard this has been a problem in other boards where there has been 1 or 2 very, very specific personality that has dominated meetings or dominated the board's agenda for multiple years, instead of allowing this to be truly like a deliberative body, which can derail, I think, the best intentions of the board. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I feel either.
Yeah, Adam, Mark, any thoughts?
I kind of feel like, we're saying may not. It should be may, so that not like
well, that's where I was
should.
trying to go in.
Yeah, and I get what you're doing. And I think that's actually maybe it's a subtle way of saying you can't not do it, not double negative, but you could do it. Maybe not really, but if you want to, you can. Not
Does
to
anyone
encourage
else have
it.
any thoughts one way? Should I strike not?
Well, one thing that comes to mind, using B's example of a personnel committee, which would not be, if you define a standing committee as like the normal, like the transportations and the land uses and the parks and all that stuff, it's highly doubtful that a personnel committee would be that kind of committee. It would be a special committee that comes into play for a certain thing, and then, and as the bylaw says, goes away after its use is finished. Then that is not a standing committee. So it doesn't seem like the bylaws would prohibit a chair from appointing a vice chair to chair like a
So
personnel.
Jesus, I was going to actually recommend later that a personnel committee be a standing committee, okay, which it had been for a while.
Okay, well then that would then
make it very difficult.
there's that. I will also say, if for example a vice chair of the board is made a chair of a standing committee, then effectively that shrinks the size of exec by one person, because they would be at exec filling two roles, that of a chair of a committee and that of a vice chair. Personally, I think that exec probably should be a little smaller, but some other people may not. So that is one of the perhaps unintended consequences of allowing a vice chair to be a chair of a standing committee. Exec gets smaller by one or two people, given that we have two vice chairs.
Okay, well put. So hearing no objection from the board members, I'm going to strike the word not. And kind of move on. So to appoint board members to committees of the board in making appointments to, that was the one I covered, I think. Same thing with chairs reports, such committees, Impress account. I'm sorry, I've gone back now. All right, so then the duties of the vice.
I'm going to not let you go. I just have one other.
Yep.
Could you talk to me about public members? That's the M one.
Yes.
We talk about the number of public members on a committee may not exceed 1/3 of total membership
of the committee.
Of the committee, yeah.
Of
So
such
if you
committee,
have a committee, if you have a committee that has 6 people or 7 people, you're almost, I mean, I don't know how we came up with the numbers or stuff, and should you have a large number of public? I just raised that. I don't have an opinion, but I guess this is the first time I saw it.
Yeah,
Does
I
anyone
think
have an opinion?
I mean, my thought here is that public members are full functioning members of a committee. They're not of the board. If one were to remove this restriction, it would allow a board chair to effectively control the entire discussion, debate, and voting of a committee, because a chair would then appoint 100 people, public members, to the 6 people who are actually appointed by the borough president. So I think this is just a control to ensure that those who have been appointed by the borough president and local council members have, in fact, a fair say.
Okay, I accept that.
Okay. So duties of first vice chair. So I think I kind of mentioned this already, but to assist the chair when necessary or represent the board when representation is required to other city agencies, should say, or community coordination meetings or something along those lines. Any thoughts on that?
How about, are you going to add, are you going to add something about mentoring?
As the role of the first vice chair specifically, or the second vice chair?
First or second.
Or both.
Because Myrna, we had a discussion about, is there a formal mentoring program? What do we have? And I think it could be in both. People have different points of view, different experiences, and I think especially now with what we've gone through Zoom, we really haven't done a lot with new members, and I think that's something that should really be reflective in my mind. It's your future.
Because we need to groom people.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I would think actually it's maybe a two-way street, because I think ideally a vice chair of the board is preparing to perhaps take on the reins as chair of the board in the future.
except
and
for
it
us.
wouldn't be currently the two vice chairs have been chairs of the board. So I think it's a little backwards in this case. But yeah, I think that would be the ideal way. So maybe mentoring new board members, but also working closely to ensure that they are prepared moving forward. So I'll put something and I'll come up with something for the next go around. Same, I think, for second vice chair, right? We're in agreement that that item.
Yeah,
okay.
I think both of those positions should have it. I don't know if Adam, Sean, and War have any other thoughts about that.
No, that actually comes up in the part that somebody had a comment about mentorship and development in the section about the executive committee. So I think that they'll probably be complementary.
Yeah, this will give someone an actual tasking to help ensure that that actually happens. Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually looking for a tasking. Thank you. That's the exact same language. I'm a taskmaster. What can I tell?
All right. So secretary, there were a couple of comments that were more general comments about, and those of you who have read, there were a couple of both ends of the spectrum: too many, too little, too much, too little role, I guess, too little tasks or too little things that they actually have to do. So I think one of the questions was, do we need an assistant secretary? Do we need an assistant treasurer? And also, should there be more that they are responsible for, or officers are responsible for? So for the secretary, I did change some of the language. I think there were a couple of comments around the fact that often now, in fact, as the minutes are being taken by Adam, board members are kind of responsible for minutes individually. We have the board office who's responsible for maybe coordinating and facilitating as well. So as a secretary, I added the word overseeing in the compilation of minutes so that there is some oversight from a secretarial and officer position. And I added the final draft version of the minutes as approved by the secretary and chair shall be furnished to all board members prior to the following board meeting for approval. Because I think the way it read before was that the secretary approved minutes, which is of course not what happens. The secretary approves the final draft, which then gets recommended to the board for adoption.
Right.
And then I also added the word formal to communications, not to infer that the secretary oversees email or phone calls for the board office, but really letters, that sort of formal communication with other agencies.
Can I ask a question, Sandra? And
yes,
I think
sir.
B too. I didn't read the other parts of the bylaws yet this time, but is there a spot where we talk about what minutes are, and if digital is okay as far as communications and versus written? Is that clarified somewhere else in the bylaws, or will it be?
Don't think specifically to minutes. That doesn't ring a bell to me. I don't know, Jesus, if you recall something that I don't. Or B.
I'm sorry. I was still thinking. I was still chewing on what Sandra was saying about approving letters coming out of the office.
Yeah,
what was the question? I'm sorry.
Well, it's more like, how we're saying we have the recording of the meeting is the actual minutes, and then we have a whatever. I mean, was that addressed somewhere else in the bylaws to clarify what we can do now that we have recordings and Zooms and that sort of stuff?
No, all of that happened very recently. So obviously the bylaws hadn't been changed recently. So that is a function of the open meetings law and what it
which
says.
We do reference. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So as long as then I think in all these sort of things about minutes, as long as we can say that the minutes are discussed later on, what they are, or how they're done.
But a wrinkle, like if we're all forced back in person, and because of where we can find meeting space, we cannot have reliable, good recordings, audio or video or otherwise. That may not be an option for us, and we may have to revert back to, whatever minutes were before. That said, the open meetings law says that only very basic things need to go in the minutes. So we should not. Things are still uncertain, so I don't know that we can rely on having crystal clear recordings in the foreseeable future. But Yeah.
that we may be able to have language that says if, it's an option.
Yeah.
That's what,
Yeah, well, it may take a little while to get through these bylaws, so we may be able to have the language.
that's somewhere later on, I guess. Okay, yeah.
So I do have a question because Jesus raised it. So when you're talking about letters, you're really not talking about letters that the office does, because I imagine there's a lot of letters that are done, that those are the letters you would expect the secretary to do by using your word formal.
Yeah, so I think that the language here is to supervise the maintenance of all information, orders, directives, minutes, communications, and other. So I actually think, coming to the attention of the board. So I actually think that in theory, I don't know, the secretary is receiving city planning's land use, and that is a little awkwardly worded because it's not something that we normally have the secretary participate in. It's normally between the board office and maybe the chair who manages that. So. That's a very good point, and I'm not really sure how that should live in the future.
Yeah, I haven't seen it operating in that manner, and so I think that's something we could raise as a question to ourselves and think about, because I think that expands the role greater than I think a volunteer would really want to do.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would be careful, given that in my time here, I have seen more and more duties of the secretary fall onto the office little by little. Right now, we're doing the minutes for exec. We write them because there is no assistant secretary. And they used to split it up that, okay, one secretary does full board and one secretary does exec, because our current secretary, or because it's deemed too much for both one secretary to do both sets of minutes. So the more we can say that we want the secretary to do, I would love it if the secretary would handle all of the minutes, and all they do is give us a nice pristine copy that we just have to forward to the members. I don't see that as being realistic, though. I would that it were.
Yeah, and there are a lot of organizations that don't function that way, to be fair as well, right? I think there's two different approaches. Some have a very directly involved secretary, and sometimes, because the secretary is an officer, and so sometimes the secretary is really overseeing a staff member or someone else in their actual compilation of the minutes. But I think, we've had an interesting rotational approach. I think all of us at one point or another has done minutes, has done resolutions, which definitely makes us all better informed and understands what's involved. So I would never say that I would never agree, for example, that it would be a good idea to say that the staff should do all the minutes. But it is interesting to figure out how to balance that workload amongst a secretary and assistant secretary. It's a good point, Jesus.
Well, I don't even know, Sandra, if the secretary actually sees any of the critical letters that even come into the board.
At this point, I would gather they do not. Yeah, I mean, I don't recall the secretary in the last few administrations being in that role. So perhaps that B section does not really make sense.
Yeah, so I think we have to look at that, and it has to be realistic given the fact that it is a volunteer.
Yep. So I already heard a call from Jesus, I think, for a need for an assistant secretary. I don't know if there was anyone on the committee who wanted to discuss the relevance of an assistant secretary or assistant treasurer, for that matter.
Yeah, I think the assistant secretary is important given what the duties are, but I don't think, given the history of the assistant treasurer on how that came, given the fact of how the financial records of the community board was before the Office of Management and Budget, actually became involved, given the fact that a lot of the duties listed on the treasurer we don't really do anymore. I do question the need for an assistant treasurer at this, to have that position, because it becomes more rote in what the treasurer does now. He gets the information from OMB, he sends the information, he reports on the information, and he talks to Jesus about where they are with the budget and ordering. Those are really the major things that I've seen. I've been away from it a while, but the role changed over the years.
That's true. That's true. Any other thoughts on the merits of an assistant treasurer?
I would have to agree with B. I mean, in a bizarre way, almost the assistant, the district manager almost functions as the assistant treasurer, because I, as a city employee, I actually have access to the budget and the mechanism with which we move money around and pay things and things like that. No, not a penny gets spent without me having to sign something or approve something. So, I mean, Brian is a really good treasurer. He did a good job. B was a really good treasurer. I liked working with both of them. We were always pretty much able to manage things whenever just me and the treasurer. So I have not yet seen that great a need for an assistant.
Yeah, we did that during the transition period, but also remember, the officers can't get access to the books. You have to be a city employee to get the stuff.
Right.
So it really limits you.
The only time I remember when the assistant treasurer came in handy was, unfortunately, after the passing of Charles Buchwald. That's how B became treasurer. She was assistant treasurer. He was
actually B was treasurer before and went into this role of assistant.
She
so
came
Charles
back.
could.
Yeah.
It was
came back to us.
It was a callback.
Yeah. So, but barring hopefully unfortunate events like that,
Yeah. Okay, so I think it sounds like we're kind of erring on the side of we don't need necessarily an assistant treasurer, but we still need an assistant secretary.
Yeah, I think the role is much more expensive.
Yeah. There's actual things to assist with, right? So before I move on to the assistant, I just not scroll down. So there's the spacing again between financial and condition. So one comment that came in, I think from Brian, was that we don't normally have the treasurer prepare a budget, but again, this is kind of a conditional. Things might change in the future. I don't know if it makes sense. So right now I have present any yearly budget prepared by the board staff to the board if prepared, which is the kind of formatting that Brian recommended. Instead of to prepare an annual budget, that they are required to prepare an annual budget and such periodic modifications as may be necessary for the approval of the board, which was awkward. Thoughts?
Well, as the office deals a lot with this, it seems reasonable. We have never done budgets like this.
Right.
Well, I think I would just change the language in the sense that if there's requirement to do a yearly budget, because I don't actually think you do a yearly budget, Jesus, do you?
No, we don't.
They give you the budget.
I keep good records about how we have spent our money and on what sorts of things. And I share that information with the treasurer to give them a breakdown. But I don't prepare that in advance saying, okay, this next year we're going to be doing this. I sort of see what we've done and then make a list of what we have done.
This is the only thing I can see being a benefit here, really. I mean, I don't think we necessarily need to have a formalized budget in that sense that needs to be adopted. We have, consumables we're using. But when I do recall, we often had a situation where we had OTPS dollars that had an expiry date. And if we did not use them by or go through the process of rolling them over for future purposes, we would lose them.
We bought paper.
Tony loved to buy paper.
I went in there and had a lot of paper.
Yeah.
Now you know why.
I'm not recommending that, right? So maybe having a little bit of a budget mindset in that aspect would help trend and spend accordingly instead of like last minute spends or filing. Any thoughts on that?
Given that I do keep such close tabs on the budget, months and months and months in advance, I sort of raise this issue with the treasurer. I say, okay, we're projected to have X many thousands of dollars left over. The thing is, though, unless ideas come, some committees sometimes have really interesting ideas later in the fiscal year, and so we end up doing something like, oh, they want to spend $20,000 on doing a study with on a piece of street or something like that.
Right.
Things like that, that maybe they would not have thought of at the beginning of the fiscal year. You know,
So
I
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
no, I guess I want to keep it a little flexible, given that we are, the bandwidth has a limit, and it seems to work right now. I've been trying to do a decent job of, you know, alerting the treasurer to surpluses, and most of the time we get down to, we end up using it properly, and sometimes we do have to give some money back, but it's never, so far it's never been, in recent years since I've really been making this effort, it hasn't been more than like 5% or something that we have to give back.
So the one thing,
so I think you could take this, Sandra, and just say, deal with the fact of progress on the budget and any unspent funds reporting to the board, which is in essence what the treasurer gets from Jesus.
okay, I'm sorry, could you kind of rephrase that a little bit? So present what? Progress?
So present the progress on the budget, which he does, you hear him, you know, there, and any unspent funds, and requests recommendations for initiatives, projects, purchase, whatever we want. Because we don't have to do a dialogue. He just says we have X amount and we go on.
Okay. Yeah, I'll fix the language after.
Maybe the treasurer can present that information at exec, for example, or to the committee chairs who may be in a good position to propose projects. I guess I'm a little squeamish about the budget at times because I have heard horror stories from other boards where board members who maybe don't necessarily have a lot of experience in being a treasurer start to micromanage the budget, and it can get really messy. And we have been very fortunate that we are well behaved and drama free, and I have to give that up.
We'll deal with the language, but I know what the intent is. Okay.
Yeah, and the one thing you know, Jesus, you make a very good point. While you personally maybe have been a good custodian of our budget, I think we need to think of the bylaws not as the particular person who inhabits any particular role, but as the role of a district manager, of the role of a chair of a committee, because we're not always as fortunate to have the foresight from different people. So we should be cautious and think about it that way. Okay. Yeah, we'll tidy up that language. So just scrolling on a little bit. So here's the assistant treasurer. Oh, look, there's a missing space there as well, but it looks like we're probably going to strike this whole section.
Your missing spaces are different than mine. Maybe it was my printer, but it's like, who knows? Yeah.
Maybe I have to pay extra for HP toner for spaces.
Right, so let me just ask Sandra before we go to 3. Does any other committee member have any suggestions on Article 2?
None for me.
I put my hand up, but I'm just going to speak. I think there was one other note in the recommendations for 2C1C, which I believe came from Anne. It's not a huge deal, but she recommended that we perhaps change the language to say that the chair it's not his or her duty to inform the board members of calendar notices.
Of what?
Calendar notices.
I did not, right now, all these changes reflect the executive committee commentary, not the ones that came in the last day or two through Airtable, but I can definitely speak to some of those if you'd like. Which item was that? I'm sorry.
2C,
1C. 2C, 1C.
Back down, you passed.
No, this one, right? We're talking about the duty of the chair, 2C1C.
Oh, there's, yeah.
So this is in fact what happens. So the official, so for example, a commissioner of agency X has to notify the board. They do so by sending a letter and notification to the leader, technically the elected leader of the board, which happens to be the chair. And that, of course, often is delegated or disseminated either to staff or to committee or whatever. But they technically, I think, are the person that is charged with receiving, much like if we're notifying city planning, it'll be, the city planning head, not a staff member or anyone else.
And that's actually what's in like ULURP and things. It has to go to the the chair. Even though it goes to Jesus and he does it, it's technically addressed to the chair is.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Anything else before we move on to the elections? Okay, Sandra, this is going to be an interesting one.
Is it?
Yeah, because I have a major question on that.
Okay. So there's not a lot of change that I made so far. I think the first section, the second, or not the first, but the second section, I should say, the first one we've covered is, I think that was a little bit more cut and dry. And then we start getting into elections and the fourth article. Those are really more concept, directional changes that we might want to consider. So I only tackled at this point really the very simple ones that actually I think are not worth discussing. But to your point, B, do you want me to go through the questions that came up through the executive committee?
No, if I could just raise, and I think I raised this when we were talking initially at the meeting. So let me just raise the general thing, because I do agree, if you accept the general premises, it's only small changes. So I think we had the question, is the cycle that we do for appointing our officers the appropriate cycle? Or if you look at other community boards, they have different cycles for the election. And the reason I raise this is if you are dealing with the appointment of the elections committee, okay, in the month of June, okay, and then you have the report in September and the election in October, because we don't meet in the summer, okay, any new board member really doesn't know any of the people, and there's no attachment or feeling. So you have in some places elections taking place in January. You have some places, further before the new people come on. So I just wanted us to think about, is this, should we continue it this way, knowing that if you have 5 people, 7 people, they don't know any of the people. And we don't really require people, because there's a lot of people don't put themselves up for office, to introduce themselves, go through their bios, other than, something superficial. So I wanted to raise with this committee, are you all comfortable with the timing of the election as we have now?
I just would throw out one thing, is that in 2 years, a huge chunk of the board won't be on the board anymore because of term limits. So that actually does have an impact, even more so than currently. Instead of getting 5 new members, we're going to have 25 new members or whatever it is, 30. I don't even know.
The first chunk of board members who are termed out is 5 years from now.
5 years?
Yes.
Oh, darn.
Got a reprieve, Mark.
And then there are some that got an additional term. Those who were appointed for the first time or reappointed in 2020 get 5 terms. And those who were appointed in 2019, when the law first took effect, or any other year other than 2020, they get the normal 8. They did it so that everyone's not leaving the board at the same time.
Which is smart. Okay. So we're stuck on for 5 more years.
So what is so B, to your point though, I think the election cycle can be construed as either being too long, too short, not the right time of year. Does anyone have any particular feelings about that? I have a couple of weird thoughts, but I'm not really sure they all align. So for example, I like the idea of the elections for the chair or the officers being wrapped up prior to the new administration in the city, the borough president's office taking office, because that does allow for someone to come up with how like our board would be addressing a new mayor or a new council member. So I think having it before January makes sense, but it's also hindered by the summer recess, as you point out, lack of the ability for us to talk and potentially advocate for ourselves or other candidates or a particular position. So I don't know that I have a clear fix in mind. I don't know if anyone else does. Or improvement.
Just allow everyone to present, give a stump speech, whether,
require speeches.
Or just encourage a speech to be made. I mean, B makes a good point that, and we have a brand new member on this committee.
Yeah.
And she could tell us what her experience was having to vote for someone whom she may or may not have known all that well. I think it would be a good idea. I mean, it does seem at times that the board wants meetings to be over with as fast as possible. And while I understand respecting people's times, sometimes you have to take the time to do things right. And then, you know.
So what are the other board committee members? And then I'd like to hear from more. Adam, what's your thoughts?
I mean, that's my primary thought is the one that's brought up is there's just not enough time for new members. I'm curious, but logistically, October is sort of the last normal month. November you bump into the holidays, and December, it's just all holidays, right? And so it's either potentially October or January. I'm curious, the other boards that do January elections, how have you seen that? Do you have any more information on that? No,
other than I read the bylaws of all the Manhattan community boards, and I noticed that they had different timeframes, a number of them. And I didn't have time to call them to say, when did they go to that or what was involved. But I do want to hear from a new member after, we hear from Sean for your thoughts, Mark, and then more. I'd like to hear from you. Because I think you said meeting, the only way you've gotten to know a lot of people is the interaction that we've been having. Sean, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think as somebody who had this experience recently, having joined the board and then had an election immediately thereafter, I thought it was a pretty not great experience. I did not feel like I was qualified to be voting on things and people. So I think the timing is an issue. I agree.
Okay. Mark?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I feel like there's so many little tweaky things. And I think in the election cycle too, does that, not our election, but the mayor, the Senate, the Assembly, the City Council, does that impact us sometimes too? I'm just not sure. I feel like this is something we probably should look at, ask other boards, like you were saying, B, and maybe have a bigger discussion about it, because it's.
Yeah. I think, we should, I'm going to go back and pull the boards that have it at a different time. I just wanted to raise this with you. Maura?
Yeah. I think that I have a strange situation because there were no options for candidates this year. It was one person for each role, actually not even one person for every role. So I'm not sure that I can speak specifically to what the bylaws might indicate, but I will say that I would hope that anyone who is joining the board also had been participating as a public member, or excuse me, as a member of the public previous to joining. So they may have some idea of who everyone is just from witnessing the meetings. I certainly did, but I obviously did not get to know any of you until now. I wonder if we can push it from October to November, just to give that much more time, but still have elections done before the new year.
That's a proposal. I think, you know, I don't think we're going to settle this tonight, but let's park this issue. Then I'll let Sandra go through, and I'll do a little more research. And if you guys, you know, in talking to people from the boards or stuff, I don't know, Jesus, if you have any experience in talking to your colleagues, why they have different election times.
Not so much the election cycles, more the terms, the law, how lengthy the terms are. But yeah, that's really all. And it looks like Mark Thompson requests the floor.
Oh, thank you. Just a thought is, you know, Amara, we almost never have contested elections. That's sort of, it really.
We've had a few, yeah. We've had
very few, which is interesting because other boards, sometimes it's like a knock 'em, sock 'em kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe we sort of suggest or think of the elections committee. Do they do like a candidates night? So everybody who's running, it's not at a meeting, but it's a special night where you come and you talk and we have an hour and people can ask questions. So it's a little less crammed into our agenda.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I wonder how much of this we can actually regulate. I know when I ran for chair of the board, I actually called every single board member, had a nice conversation about what they were interested in, what I thought was important. I don't think we could put that in the bylaws that everyone must have a conversation with candidates, but I do like the idea of making some sort of forum for those conversations to foster themselves. I think we could do something along those lines.
Yeah.
So one question for, I guess specifically for Maura and Sean, if we were hypothetically to have elections in November as opposed to October, would we want to have the report from the elections committee also pushed back a month, or would it be more advantageous to continue to do it in September and have that longer lead time to get to know the candidates?
I think.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think the longer lead time is good. I also mentioned this in our last and first bylaws meeting that there were no speeches or presentation of candidates that happened before the vote. I think that that's absolutely necessary. It shouldn't be not necessarily invited, but required.
Okay.
I agree on the longer lead time being really helpful. I think that would be great. I don't think forcing people to speak is really, I mean, look, if somebody doesn't want to say anything, or even if you force them to, they're just going to say a sentence. So like, I don't know. I don't really see the added benefit of that.
So I actually think you're really hearing almost a proposal just to move everything by 1 month and to have a forum, which I think is a great idea.
Well, if we kept, I think what I heard was to keep potentially the report in September, which means that in October we could have an extracurricular, perhaps, or before a board meeting, forum type, discussion to allow for that, and still have not everyone feel like they have to sit in hours and hours of extra meetings. Yeah, maybe.
Right, and then have the election in November, which is just before the holidays. I think that's a proposal we should think about, because I didn't realize Sean was also impacted by it. But in the interim, I will try to reach out and see, how the other offices did, how the other boards did.
Yeah. I mean, I guess everyone was appointed during the regular appointment cycle, but I know that sometimes there's those interim appointments as well, which could be even more complicated.
Adam Hartke requests the floor.
Yeah, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, even speaking to that point, sometimes the appointments themselves can be delayed. We've experienced that the last few cycles, from the borough president's office. But I wanted to bring up the election committee process. Maybe this isn't the time to discuss it, but I know there were several comments within the Airtable about that. That I think that might also lead into the lag time. I know the comment specifically was like, do we need this process? Should we just be nominating these people from the floor? Is this a unnecessary step? So I don't know if that's something we want to discuss now or later.
One of the complications that occurred to me that was a very practical one, we have to have ballots. We're required to have ballots, so we can't have like everyone just decide at that time. That absolutely also does not give anyone opportunity to discuss campaign or anything like that. But we need to ultimately record ballots of those who are running. I think it's required by law. So it does require that we have to know who the candidates are ahead of time so that we can have an accordingly.
So Sandra can make the ballots.
Well, someone can make the ballots. I'm not making ballots anymore if I can.
Yeah. Well, and that's especially, I think it's also especially important because if you have a slate or something you're proposing, having run the elections committee, and then you have nominations from the floor, that's why it would be important to have a candidates night or whatever.
Yeah.
And let me just mention Maura's comment about people running, even getting people to run for the office, one person, okay, is very, very hard, okay?
Right.
So I can tell you that I made a lot of phone calls over the summer, okay? So when people say one should talk to people and stuff of that nature, people have their other lives and they don't want to take on the additional responsibilities and stuff. They volunteered for a limited kind of thing as opposed to a real leadership position. So we are dealing with the fact that this is a volunteer organization. But I can tell you from having spoken to people and actually twisted arms, it's a very difficult situation to get a ballot together.
So, all right. Excellent point. So I think there were two comments for section 3 in the Airtable. The other one was how do we encourage people to run for office, which we've been discussing. I think that's something not necessarily that has to be codified in particular language here, but maybe something that we encourage and figure out whether it's the vice chair is doing a more mentor-mentee kind of relationship with some of the new board members, for example. How do we foster that environment? Because there definitely should be more people running. We have a wonderful board, and I know people are proud of it that are sitting on it, so they should feel empowered to take on that leadership role as well. So there was also a question about elections. Well, really, what if we do not have anyone run for office, and what do we do in the interim? So there is a provision for special elections. And, so just to kind of recap, if there is a vacancy, the chair or the board through majority vote can call for a special election to fill it. So I think not so much the initial election window that we're talking about, because obviously we're not going to call for a special election if no one's willing to take on a position at that point in time. But at any given time later in the year, as things change, maybe there is someone who is willing to do so. Either the chair or the majority of the board would be able to potentially create a special election to fill that vacancy. So I don't think that there's necessarily a problem with the structure of this. I think the underlying problem is what was already discussed, that perhaps no one is running for a particular office. Unless I read this.
No, I read it the way you did, Sandra.
Okay. Any thoughts from anyone else? No? Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure we do our due diligence in going through the comments. I don't want to keep us all night long.
Yeah. And one question, Sandra.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of it's a question I don't think we need to address it though, is what if somebody who's on the elections committee and for some reason decides they do want to run, like let's say there's an opening and nobody wants to be the assistant whatever or the whatever, and it's sort of like, yeah, well, somebody's got to take it and do it, and a person drops off elections committee, are they then able to run?
So right now, not exactly. So I'm trying to find
No, you're absolutely right, because I had this situation, Sandra.
Yeah.
And so, but it can be, you can put that into the bylaws, that if there isn't a position that is filled, and a person who's on the, I mean, you can deal with that, okay?
Mhm.
Yeah, I know it's in here somewhere. I've lost my place, I think. Maybe it's a little further down. It's definitely in here somewhere.
It is.
Yeah, I know it is. Just in terms of the pro and con of it, obviously, to your point, maybe there's no one else willing to run for a particular position, and one of the election committee members says, okay, in fact, I will stand for the position if it's what's needed. Definitely a possibility for us to do that. Right now, it does prohibit someone who is on the elections committee, wherever it is. I know it's here somewhere, wherever it is.
It's 3A, I don't know, 1 maybe or something. It's right below my
3A.
note.
Oh, it was further up. Is it further up here? Yeah. You're right. It is.
Okay.
So eligible
Can't read my own
members of the
handwriting, but
board.
it's there.
Yeah.
Well, it can be more, we can talk about exceptions if there are no candidates for a position.
Yep. So any member of the board who accepts appointment to the elections committee shall be ineligible to run for board office in the election cycle supervised by the committee. I mean, I think the reason why that's there is because we definitely didn't want to have an elections committee.
Yeah.
I'm the chair of the elections committee. I found that I was the best person to run for chair, like that sort of that sort of abuse of power. It has not happened to my knowledge. I don't know if anyone else recalls it ever happening. And I don't think this was a reaction to that happening. I think it was just a potential concern that came up previously. Yeah, we could remove that. I don't know. Robert's Rules of Order actually allows it for a person who sat on the elections committee also to stand for an officer position.
Okay.
That was when the committee was called nominating committee. And then years ago, you guys changed the bylaws to the elections committee, because unlike on some other boards where there is a gatekeeping function that the nominating committee performs, that was not the practice here, at least not recently. And so I think it was Rick who was like, well, let's change it to elections committee, because that's all they do is just manage the logistics.
It's facilitators. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's definitely not an attempt to control who can run.
So, you could deal with, well, you have two options for people. You do have a special election, that the person could run for afterwards, because you're not prohibited, okay? So you do have that ability. And you do have the ability, I think, that, when you say under B, at least 2 weeks prior to the September board meeting, the elections committee will send the report to all members of the board. So I think if there isn't a position that's filled at that particular point in time, you could then permit someone who's on the election committee to nominate themselves from the floor, which they can't do now.
Okay. Because basically the report's done.
So actually that's actually the case, right? So B, the elections committee shall formally enter its final report, compiling one or more candidates at the September meeting. So at that point in time, technically the elections committee is effectively done, right? With that election cycle, that is their final report. They have nothing further to add to the whole election.
Yeah.
So
do we clarify it or not?
You need to clarify it, because it doesn't read that way. It doesn't say, because if you read the one before, at September meeting, the board may offer additional nominees, including themselves, but not including members of the election committee.
Right, because that's a continuation of this particular one. We could strike both of those clauses, just including themselves. Okay.
You could end it at including themselves.
Yeah, from the floor.
From the floor, yeah.
Like that, yeah.
Yeah, and that would take care of it. Yeah, because there was the potential of some talent, but they couldn't, given the position of where they were.
Right. Okay. If there's no objection, I'll just strike those two clauses.
Does anyone have any objection?
No, okay.
Okay.
Sean Sherman's hand was up, but then it came down. I don't, Sean, did you request the floor? Okay, guess not.
So then, okay, so there was also a comment, not specifically to the bylaws as written, and just where does abstain come from in electing officers? Non-voting makes more sense, and abstention would serve as a no vote. So I think this is one part, understanding what is required through the open meetings law. One part required disclosing of conflict of interest. So this is it should just be a yes or no versus yes, no, abstain, or abstain for cause, which I think we're required through the charter actually to include in all votes.
I'm not sure about that. We'd have to, I can look into it. The open meetings law does not go into specifics about ballots and what should be on there. I do know that the Freedom of Information law, while I'm not sure it specifically requires ballots, it does specifically require that every single member's vote on every significant action be recorded.
Right.
So that's why.
So, which is effectively, unless we're doing an actual voice roll call on every single vote, the only way we would do that.
Which
right?
some boards do, yes.
Yeah, we already have long votes. I don't know that we need to extend the actual voting process.
So in a way, we were actually not in compliance with that before. Before Zoom forced us to go to roll call votes for committee members for committee meetings. That is something we're going to have to keep if we go back to in-person committees, because before we would not have been able to tell you how each committee member voted on a draft resolution. But the Freedom of Information law says we need to keep that record. So
well, you could if you had some sort of ballot again, right?
Committees don't use ballots, but
very simply, one could do so, right? I mean, we could have a form template. I'm sorry, I know we're getting off the bylaws thing, but we could have a form template, like just fill in box number 1, fill in box number 2, yes, no, abstain for cause, that sort of thing.
Why don't we take that when we're going to deal
procedures?
With
we'll discuss it in procedures.
Okay. Okay.
All right. So, so beyond that, I had, and then it goes back into the same thing. There was a comment about, should we allow voting by acclamation, which we cannot because we have to account for votes. Should the chair be able to run after waiting 1 year after serving terms like the chairs? I think this person was asking if the chair of the board should have more limits on when they could run again, potentially after a period of time, just like we have the 5 limit for standing committee chairs right now. It does encourage new leadership. I would hate to say that Mark should run again or I should run again as chair of the board, honestly.
Well, they're allowed to run again if there's that 1 year space.
Right, but I don't know that they should.
Well, I actually
we need to clarify.
Oh, wait, let me go to that section then. Let me go to that section.
Yeah, because I actually think you need to have succession planning.
Yeah.
And you need to have new people with new points of view taken to leadership, but there has to be a very firm succession planning. That's why I'm really supportive of mentoring, guys.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So where are you that you're looking at?
I'm trying to find the terms of office section. Okay, here we are. 4. So we moved into 4 officially. So wait, before I move into 4, there were no further 3 items, right? Or is that actually still in 3?
No, that's in 4.
It sounds like it should be, but for some reason, the document that was circulated, it's under the 3 section. So I just want to make sure.
Maura, did I hear you?
Yeah, I just have a formatting thing for section D, 3D. Numbers 1, 2, and 3 are, I think they should all, oh, you're there.
Which one? I said D or B? I'm sorry.
D.
D.
A special election shall be held to fill that section. Number 4 is not actually a circumstance. I think.
Good point.
1, 2, and 3 are circumstances.
Yep, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. Good read.
Okay.
Maura, you going to help edit the whole thing?
Yes.
Sure. Absolutely.
Hey, she's one of us now. Yay.
Notice how I could bring one in.
Get the gold
Thank
star.
You're very good at editing. Thank you, Maura. Okay.
Outdent, I guess it is. I'll just do that later. Okay. All right. So we were at terms. I'm sorry. Anything else? Was that it? Okay. So each officer of the board should serve a 1-year term, coterminous currently with the chair of the board, which I think makes sense. I don't think that was up for discussion by anyone. So then here's B, no board chair shall serve as such for more than 3 consecutive 1-year terms, period. It doesn't,
Period.
Then, right. Any person who has served as board chair for 3 consecutive 1-year terms shall not be eligible to serve as a chair of a standing committee for 1 year after his or her. Oh, this is the one I missed. So I think we spoke about this briefly, but I did make corrections throughout most of the document wherever I saw his or her to change it to their or they.
Right.
Final term as chair of the board. Any board member who has served as board chair for at least 1 full term shall serve on the executive committee as an ex officio member. That just means by virtue of their office held. Yeah.
So I actually wanted to increase that, Sandra, to 2 years, because I think there's different experience that you can get from someone who is chair of the board. And we have the unusual situation that you and Mark were chair of the board and in the position, of first and second vice chair, so you bring the history. But if you weren't there, your past chairs, it really gives it to you. So I circled the 1 year because I thought it should be longer.
So if a board chair serves for 1 year and then is replaced, does that board chair then become a member of the executive committee for 2 years or 3 years? Is that what you're saying?
I was giving it more than 1 year. I was giving it 2 years. Okay. As an experience base.
So the initial part. So if they've served more than 2 years, then they're an executive committee member. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's exactly.
Okay. Any thoughts on that?
Well, and I do have something that, since I'm throwing it out, and I know we're late, so I don't know if this will be a big discussion or not. A number of the other boards had more than a 1 year term. They had 2 year terms. Okay. Some even had longer. So the question I just raised, I'm not too sure I have an opinion on it right now. Is it effective to have 3 1 year terms, or would it be more effective for continuity to have 1 2 year term and then a third added? I raised that question.
A third single year?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
I just raised it.
What if the chair is absolutely terrible? You're stuck with
that
person
I
for
I was going to actually ask that as I was looking at the bylaws. Okay.
Yeah.
I was looking to see, is there a way of recall, or do you go to the borough president or whatever you do? I actually didn't find it unless someone else did. In the, of course, everyone could use the political route as well. But I was just looking, there is no method. There's a method for the chair to remove committee chairs and, to remove members and stuff. But I didn't see a mechanism to remove a chair if it turns out to be a disaster or malfeasance or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I have to look at the borough board, but I don't think the borough president can remove someone from an elected office. I think the only recourse that a borough
Is a
president might
recall?
have would be to remove the member of the board entirely. I don't think they can say this person is no longer chair or treasurer. I don't know that they have that specific authority.
Bylaws do, the city charter does not give the borough president that kind of authority.
Yeah. Adam.
Yeah, I was just gonna say if unless we extend the terms to beyond 1 year, I don't know, like a recall or impeachment sort of process doesn't seem applicable, because it's like basically you just have to write out that year if that person is a disaster. That's the benefit of having 1 year terms. Now, however, if they're 2 year terms, then yes, there probably should be a recall feature of some sort.
That's
Yeah.
a whole
No, you're right,
additional
Adam. The
section.
1 year term used the political process
Yeah.
to do it. That's why I said I had no opinion, but people raised it in the executive committee about the terms, and I've seen it in some of the board member comments. So I just wanted to make sure we touched it.
So just before I move on, just in terms of the ex officio member of the executive committee, does everyone think that two full terms should entitle that as opposed to one? I know we haven't changed the term yet.
Yeah.
Obviously that might change again, but is that appropriate? What do you think? Yay, nay? Abstain for cause.
I'm a yay.
Anyone have opinions?
Mara would like the floor.
No, I'll wait until we discuss this.
Yeah, on this one I'm indifferent, but though I want to ask for clarification. So I assume ex officio means they have no voting power?
No, that's not correct. Ex officio just means that they're a member by virtue of their office. So this is basically just saying because they were chair, they're a member. So all members enjoy the same joys of voting. So they would be a voting member.
Okay. So yeah, I'm indifferent.
That's probably a bad parliamentarian that told you ex officios don't vote. Sorry.
No, I don't think it's a parliamentarian. I was just assuming I would get emeritus and ex officio mixed up. So.
I mean, if everyone's indifferent, we could leave it the way it is. I just wanted to raise it.
But I would keep it as a note of like, let's think about it. We may chew on it overnight. Next
Maura,
week
you had something?
Yeah, I'm just curious why the term limits are 3 1 year limits instead of 4.
Well, it used to be
I don't
2.
know.
Yeah, I think it used to be 2, and we all felt like that was a little too short because by the time you actually get the swing of things and start having effective conversations with other agencies, you're kind of at the door.
Yeah.
But we didn't want it to become like a fiefdom, or someone that just rules for years and years. Yeah, we've seen other boards. I mean, that's a very serious problem where one person is effectively anointed the chair for a decade or two, and really is the single person who controls the conversation. It's definitely not a body. It's a shame.
It can be good, but it can be bad. It can be
effective. Is this the at least the trains run on time argument? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Don't go there now.
Yeah.
Bad time.
So, all right. I'll leave this as a possible
Discussion topic or something.
Yeah, so we can come back to it. Maybe Seema will have some thoughts on it too. There was a comment, I think we kind of covered this already, about whether the elections committee needs to have an obligation to find nominees. I don't think we need to add more language around that, unless someone else happens. Yeah.
Yeah, the obligation word I would object to, knowing what I went through this year.
It's a lot of work, right?
And then there's also some people who complained that the elections committee was, trying to recruit people to run for office. And it's like, well, yeah. So.
And well, on the flip side, there was a comment about should the chair of the elections committee be elected to ensure independence. Currently, chair appoints committee and chair is frequently a candidate. Being that it's an elections committee and not not a vetting committee. It's not a committee that actually determines who can be on the ballot. It's just kind of facilitating the reporting and the dissemination that someone is a candidate. I don't think that's ever been a problem where I don't see a real effective way for the chair of an elections committee to, control or prevent someone from running or being elected. I don't see that as an actual threat. I don't know if anyone else reads that differently or, interprets it differently. No. Okay.
No.
So the question, I think, again, article or terms of office, should there be 5 consecutive year limit on serving as committee chair with a 10-year limit on members? I doubt this provision will be important over time. While it is a good idea to make sure there is a rotation out of being a committee chair, it would be good to have the board chair authorized to keep someone as committee chair until replacement can be identified. That was the comment. I don't know if anyone has any thought. Obviously, this does change a little bit now that there are term limits on board members in general.
I think 5 consecutive one-year terms establishes yourself, and then I think you need to have succession with someone from the committee moving up. So I would keep it as exactly it is. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts.
The 5 years does seem sensible. It's been my experience, though, that I do think that a bit of constructive criticism, the board does need to do a little bit of a better job in building a bench, because many times I have seen scrambles for, people who are fit to lead a committee. And if that mentorship, that grooming, all of that is actually happening, there shouldn't be that kind of situation. And I've seen it more than once.
Yeah, Jesus, I don't think we should have fiefdoms. I think we should have people with expertise and then rolling people right behind them.
Yes.
Anyone else have any comments on that for Sandra?
No, I don't know. Not for me.
Okay.
So another comment, similar, should there be term limits for committee leadership and board officers? I don't know, it's a delicate balance between, trying to ensure that people new people are able to take in those reins, but also getting people who are willing to do so, as you point out it already, B. I don't know if there's any thoughts on general term limit change. And then the last comment from the executive committee was a 1-year term with a maximum of 3 consecutive terms for officers of the board is too short. So, kind of the opposite. Too long, too short.
Yeah.
Too hot, too cold. There's no Goldilocks.
I think this will have people on both sides of it, because there's no right answer. It's what you want to live with.
Right. But more importantly, what does this committee think? Do we think it needs to change up or down?
No,
that's
I
what
think
we're
it's
going to
fine the way it is.
Okay.
Yeah. It would be interesting to see what people who have served actually in these roles feel.
Yeah.
Yep.
People who've been through the battle, what they think.
So let me just real quickly go through the Airtable section 4 items. There's only 4 of them. And then I think I'll be done. So comment was 4 years is a standard for New York City elected and New York State officials. If a chair is duly elected, I believe the chair of the board, it seems to this person that their term limit should be 4 years and not 3 years. I think this this kind of assumes rather that there is like a coterminous start and stop. I don't know that they need to be aligned to councilmanic terms. I don't really see, even if somehow we aligned it, we have multiple council seats that our board covers. So I'm not really sure how the alignment to one seat versus another would even work. So I'm not sure the real intent here, other than maybe that they felt board chairs should just have longer terms or longer limits. I don't know if there are any other thoughts there.
No, and I also think people like we had with Rick don't always keep their full term. So,
Right.
you know, situations happen. So you really just can't expect it to always be coterminous.
Right.
You know, you'll always start something in the middle or something else will happen. I think it's fine the way it is.
Okay, and then I have three last comments here. Seems unlikely, but what if an officer is not reappointed? Terms of office don't match terms of appointment to the board, and this is not covered. So, you know, I think that's just a general vacancy. That then, if there was an officer that somehow was not reappointed, passed away, moved away, whatever the situation, it's a vacancy. So I think there is a provision for filling vacancies. So I don't see that as a threat either to the way the board bylaws are currently written. Seeing no hands, are there any rules or restrictions if a board chair has served for 1 or 2 years? How does this interact with the committee chair term rules?
I'm not too sure I understood that.
Yeah, are there any rules or restrictions if a board chair has served for 1 or 2 years? I don't think there are any restrictions either for 3 years, other than they're done and they shouldn't be chair anymore. I think that's the only restriction.
We do have one guest in attendance tonight, board member Letty Simon, who seems to be requesting the floor.
Okay.
I don't know about her.
So let me just say before we do that, certainly, Sandro, are you finished with the Airtable?
I have one last Airtable comment, but we can
Why don't you
defer
do
to
that
Letty
and
if
then
you'd
we'll
like.
both
Okay.
recognize Letty.
Sorry, Letty, one moment. So this is a longer one. So it says, I'm reading it, just to confirm, what's being said is that someone can chair a committee, any committee, only for 5 years. So 2 on parks and 3 on land use, for instance, or 3 on parks, a year off, and then another 5 on land use and waterfront, though see my note elsewhere about implications on term limits and for board membership. But along with section 15D under Article 4, section 15D, someone could go from chair to vice chair and back again and always have a leadership role. Seems so. I don't actually read it that way. So this was basically saying that if I guess if you jumped in and out of the chair role that of a committee, you can do that forever. So if I go back to the term limits. So here's a chair. Oh, let me just highlight it. A chair of a standing committee shall serve only during the term of the board chair, appointing or reappointing him or her. Oh, again, that's should be a reappointing them. A standing committee chair may be reappointed by a board chair provided that no member may serve as a chair of a standing committee for more than 5 consecutive 1-year terms. For this purpose, service as a chair of any and all standing committees should be aggregated.
Yeah, so it would be aggregated.
Right. So I think that line right there means that if you serve 3 years here as chair and then you become a vice chair and then come back for another 2 years, you've met your 5 years as chair of that committee. Any person who, I'm sorry?
Is it just that committee or is it any committee?
Well, it's a standing committee. It uses the clause a standing committee, not any standing committee. So yes, I think that means that one could be chair of land use and waterfront for 5 years, not be chair, and then maybe be made chair of another committee at a later point in time.
Do we need to clarify that?
How would you recommend we clarify that?
Well, rather than A, then do we keep it as A or any? You know, it's what do we want it to be? Is it of one single committee 5 years, or all committees? You know, any committee 5 years. So 3 years land use, 2 years in parks, you're done.
So 5 years, and then you have to have a cool off year, but then you can come back because perhaps you're the best SME or subject matter expert on the topic.
On that committee.
Yeah.
But what if, because I'm just wondering, like they're saying 5 years, Yeah. So you could
I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, I think the practical part of this is I know that now we're very lucky. Actually, we have several people on the board who I think are capable or well versed in land use matters in general. But for many years, I know we only had a few people who actually understood some of the land use and zoning text concepts, let alone had any sort of historical reference to it. So I can see there is the balance of trying to keep someone who's knowledgeable in a role, but of course, again, encourage some churn so that new people can take over. So
yeah, so I think, I could see the 5 years and then cool off and then coming back, but I think that should be rare. Because otherwise you are creating the same people, doing the leadership roles.
Right. Yeah. I mean, but to be fair, when I was chair, I often had difficulty finding people who would take on a role as chair of a committee. It's not like everyone's clamoring necessarily. Yeah. I would highly encourage Sean and Moira to consider becoming a chair in the near future of a committee. It's a great responsibility. But yeah, sometimes you actually are twisting arms.
It's fun. Do it.
Okay.
But yeah, if there's any language changes there, I can massage or just let me know. But not sure exactly how to.
I think this gives us flexibility the way it reads, and you may want to be ambiguous there.
Okay.
Okay. So I believe Letty.
She raised her hand by mistake. She raised her hand by mistake. She says.
Oh no! I was so looking forward to
hearing. No. She has to speak now. Letty, come on, bring it on.
Okay.
Please say hello.
Okay.
Hearing nothing, Madam Chair, I am done with my review of Articles 2, 3, and 4 at this point in time.
So I have to tell you, I think from all of us, Sandra deserves a great round of applause. That was quite a job that we went through.
Hopefully the rest is easier.
Thank you. I mean, though we're coming to some of the articles up front that had the most comments. So, and I think we each have some questions about them. So I think the way we should proceed is we should do the changes on what was happening, what we think with language, and maybe you can circulate that, Sandra, so we could take a look before the next meeting. I would then propose for the next meeting that we just take a quick look at what your changes are and see if anyone has any other comments, if we've read, Ronnie's comments or anything else that we have submitted. And then I'd like to go back to Seema to do the 1 and 9. And then if we could gear up 5 and 8 for the next session, I think we will make progress. But these are the most meaty articles that we have. And I thought the discussion was good, and I hope that you felt it was. And does any committee member have any other discussions that they'd like to? This was really one of the hard articles, and we're going to come to the next one also, which is hard. Any additional comments or thoughts? Okay. So what the chair's report, I just gave it in the sense of how we will structure the next meeting. And we'll be prepared with Seema for 1 and 9, and then the next one, 5 and 8. I don't know if we'll be able to get through all 5 and 8, but let's hope that we can. Any other new business? Okay, then I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
And there's no objections. Third. We're adjourning at 8:30. This was 2 hours of really good debate and thoughtfulness. Thanks to everyone for being there. Much appreciated.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Oh,